Good afternoon, everybody. This is Philip. I am going to give you a overview and little lecture on a book by Dr. Keith Devlin called The Math Instinct: Why You're a Mathematical Genius, along with lobsters, birds, cats, and dogs. And so we will begin our journey, just getting a little bit to know better our author, Dr. Keith Devlin. He is originally from England. He moved to the United States in 1987 and has been a major contributor to mathematics and language over those years. He has written 33 books, has published 80 plus articles. He's been the recipient of various prizes, such as Pythagoras Prize, the Peano Prize, the Carl Sagan Award, to name but a few. He is also known on NPR on the show The Weekend Edition as the Math Guy. What you see in front of you right now are the list of his current roles in academia. Specifically, he works for Stanford. Obviously, he's still very active in athletics, but also, and I think this is quite interesting, especially with language, his focus around language and information studies, which I think is part of the reason why he wrote this book. So, which we bring us to the book itself. So the book is pretty simple. It wasn't a very complicated read. It's made for a more generalized audience, and after learning a little bit more about Keith Devlin in general, I definitely can see why he wrote it in a sense. So the book can be broken down into 5 basic areas. The first 2 chapters would be more based on, they're a little more nuanced concepts, but they're what I would consider attention grabbers. And so they're trying to be more just exciting, trying to make it more real, more relatable. They talk about babies, of course, which who doesn't love babies? And they talk about babies who can have number sense, and they're able to like recognize groups of 2s and groups of 3s. They may not know what a 2 and a 3 is, but they understand what 2s look like and what 3s look like in that respect. He also shares about a dog named Elvis, which was a corgi, and his owner discovered that this dog was capable of producing a mathematical statement that's been around for a couple thousand years. That was actually part of early mathematical problem sets to help people learn how to do math. So that moves us into our next chapter, which is all about the the language of math itself, and what does that look like. And he, as we have learned, is that it's a language of patterns, and that really helps set him up for what he is going to present next as his argument over the next 5 chapters, which talks about various patterns in nature that can be mathematically described. And he begins with one is the Nautilus shell as his kind of pregame, and he moves us into and then really starts to dive deep into 5 main categories of mathematical statements in nature. So navigation, he gives a couple of examples, but one that stood out was lobsters and how they have metal in their heads, and the metal helps with the Earth's magnetic force, and they can somehow navigate with that very, very well. Construction, he talks about bees who are able to build honeycombs that are perfectly maximized on space. And then you have art, like flowers, which are blooming petal-wise to maximize on light. And then same with leaves. You also have, and then he leads into more, this is where it's cool because it moves more human. We have motion and vision. So motion, how do humans move? How difficult is it for a human to move? And effectively, and the mathematical challenges that come out of that. And then vision, in terms like our binocular vision, allowing us to have that ability to see depth. The final chapters focus more on math in its role in life, I guess, to make it simple. And we talk about animals. Do they do math? They're not doing math. Can we teach them math? And then he gives some examples of things not doing math that we thought were doing math, and then things that we think aren't doing math, but maybe are doing math. That we can teach them to do that. And then the other one is like people who are put in a situation and they have to do math, and they can do the math, but when put in the same situation but set in front with a test as a pencil and paper, they fail. And that is helps him segue into his last final chapters, which focus around humans. And he begins about sharing some history around the language of math and talks about cuneiform and various things like that, and then moves into talking about why humans might be bad at math, which is quite funny. And then finally finishes his book with giving some great reasons as to why you should not be so bad at math. And if you just try a little harder, practice, have some confidence, and just recheck your work, you'd probably do a good job. So again, his book's pretty easy to understand, simple but effective read. However, there are a couple opportunities, and one of these opportunities I discovered is through a gentleman named George Mikowski. He is an author, pretty well-known mathematician, and he wrote an article in 1992 called "The Misconceptions About the Golden Ratio." And this is something that is, I don't really did not know this, but like for instance, the Nautilus shell. Though it does follow certain mathematical patterns, it is not does not follow the golden ratio every single time. And George Mikowski talks about how it's really popular in the mathematical world and outside of it since then to follow these misconceptions. And he says in his beginning of his paper, it would take a large book to document all the misinformation about the golden ratio, much of which is simply the repetition of the same errors by different authors. And so this is where I am talking about the opportunity. Now, my partner is going to talk more about how this is this can be supported with additional information that she's going to find. I was trying to find something that was not going to do that. That was going to be the opposite, but it did not work out. Instead, I found this really interesting perspective, and that Keith Devlin, with his book, was only attempting to help better perpetuate better ideas of math in nature, which is understandable because, again, it's very common for people not to not know what's really going on, right? So he, in 2007, wrote an article called "The Myth That Will Not Go Away," and this talks about his own personal experience with being confusing about the golden ratio and what he has learned as to be accurate and inaccurate. And actually, he himself references George Mikowski's article, "Misconceptions About the Golden Ratio." And he actually throws himself under the bus and talks about how he has inadvertently contributed the misconceptions. And in 2004, he tried to write an article, or he didn't try, he wrote an article about trying to help contribute to this, better clarity for those who are a part of the conversation and those who are listening. And with the book, which was only about a year later, he tries to do this. However, that is where the opportunity comes in. And the Nautilus shell is one of those prime examples, in that he does try to use and create clarity these examples that people, that this is what it is, and that no, the Nautilus shell is not the same thing and not the golden rule. But even he knows that people hear what they want to hear. And he said in the same article that, people are pulling the information what they want. And so when you write a book and you talk about things that are like perpetually already not accurate, I feel that you're not necessarily contributing. And I don't necessarily think that was his goal to do that, was to like create more confusion. However, when you read the book, keep in mind that, the things that he uses to help kind of create these excitements and interests really are part of that same story of the same story of like perpetuating these misconceptions. And I think in 2007, if he were to rewrite the book, he may not have made those same decisions to use those things. It's not necessarily a downfall of the book, but it's just an interesting perspective on how, as we evolve, it's not always the same. So that's basically my whole entire spiel. The last page is dedicated to my bibliography. These are my references to the sites I used. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your night.